Her footsteps creaked on the narrow winding staircase, and hard heavy hands lay on the cold marble banisters, but she had had a good sleep inside of the four-poster bed in this huge mansion. She would never have thought that when she was a child that she would live in such a fine place, but as she had grown older, she had sent all dreams away and out of her mind. But she'd married late in her life, and now she had a rich husband with such a fine house. She had slept well, and she looked around her, and she loved the way that the dark curtains kept the midday winter's light out of the house. She knew she'd be going out into the forest later, but she loved to read books by the side of the crackling fire. She would read books that she could not have afforded when she was younger. Now, in the oven and in the kitchen, there was her husband's favourite meal cooking, bird pie. It was what he loved the most. Now, she pulled her short curly hair away from her eyes and smiled and looked around with her beady emerald eyes at this place. Oh, she loved the place. She loved this house. She loved her life. And she nearly loved her husband. But he gave her everything that she wanted, including money. Now, anyone who would see her would say that she was kind and she was generous. But she had a dark secret inside of her heart. For this bird pie that she made for her husband, he thought that she'd bought the pigeons from the butcher's. But no, she would go out and into the lush green forest, and she would fatten the pigeons up by throwing food down for them, and she would wait until they were the right size, and then she would reach down and she would have the food in her hand, ready for the pigeons to take, and she would snatch them, twist them once, their necks would be broken, and she would love the way that their heads would loll this way and that. For this was the way that she had eaten when she was younger, and her husband, who thought that he was giving her money to buy the finest pigeons that money can buy, he was really putting the money straight into her own hand and into her own purse, for she loved the way that she could lull these poor pigeons into a false sense of security, snatch them, kill them, pluck them, cook them, and give them to her husband. It made a grin appear upon her lips, a cheeky grin, and her eyes would sparkle. But now, the pie had been made with not just pigeons, but any birds that she could capture. One bird inside of another bird inside of a pie. 24 blackbirds, she smiled to herself, and a pigeon pie for him. There was a smell of soot in the air, for the crackling fire was waiting for her in the library that was filled with leather-bound books that lay bursting on the dusty shelves. The smell of soot in the air, the crackle of the fire, the smell of the leather, and reading. Oh, she might have been poor, but she had taught herself to read. She taught herself to read when she was inside of her own old cottage. Now she had more books than she could wish for, and when she'd been younger, she would not have been able to have afforded one of the books. She rested herself in the fine Chesterfield, the chair by the side of the fire. His shelves, for there were his shelves inside of his house were filled with dry, dusty books about politics and history, but the books that she liked to read were the new-fangled detective novels, those that were written by Conan Doyle with Sherlock Holmes, who would pick up a hair and be able to tell who and where and what and why and when a murder was committed. Just as she'd settled herself down, she opened one of her books. And as she opened the book, a small, green, age-worn note fell out. On it were written the words, "I know what it is that you do in the forest." She wondered who it could be. Her husband would eat the pigeon pie, the bird pie, and he wouldn't care where he ate it, in the kitchen. There would be a plate that would be stained with pigeon blood, but it didn't put him off his eating. He would sit there and eat in the same room as the birds had been prepared. The birds that he thought had come from the butcher's, and he never suspected a thing. The woman watched the note fall out of the book. She looked at the words as it fluttered down, almost like a leaf, down onto the ground in the library. But curiosity is a great thing. She decided that she would pull on a long coat with a fur at the collar and fur at the cuffs, and she would go out. Now, she wasn't really dressed for going out into the forest. She had a light-coloured patterned dress on, but she knew that a coat would keep her warm, and she loved the fox fur that was around her neck and at her cuffs. And on her feet she had boots, high, buttoned and buckled boots. And again, it caused that cheeky grin to spread across her face, for she would not have been able to have afforded a single one of those buckles. In the forest, the rain had fallen, and she could smell the soil in the air. The sun, the noonday winter sun, was forcing its way through the trees. The trees weren't packed together, but I'll tell you, they did cast shadows on the ground. Some people would have said that this was a place that was weird, but that was where pigeons ate, and that was where she needed to go. At her collar, she had a silver brooch that was embellished with pigeon feathers. She stroked it. It reminded her of the dead birds' carcasses as they lay in her hands. For her husband had a great appetite for bird pie. She threw down some of the food for the pigeons. She could hear them caw, 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 coming closer to her. And as they were coming closer to her, she saw a tree. And on a tree there was a leaf, a thin leaf. A leaf that looked a little like the note that she'd found inside of the book. And as she bent to look at the leaf and pull it from the tree, the one last leaf of winter, she heard a twig break, and down it fell from out of the tree and landed beside her. Oh, so I see it. A twig is falling down, but another, and another, and another, and another broke, and they started to cascade around her. But with each crack, the twigs became bigger and heavier and more sharp. And one fell and caught her at her wrist, and she fell slightly backwards. Another came down and caught her at her neck. Another caught her upon her hand, and now it seemed as if the tree was showering her with twigs that were as sharp as spears. She fell to the ground. Years later, when that forest was being cleared, they found some bones lying down upon the ground, bones of a woman who must have had huge and strong hands. And by her there were 2 buckles, silver buckles. No one knew how they came to be in that place. No one knew how the woman had died. No one knew what had happened to her.